I think this is a fundamental issue, and I think it's a fundamental issue not just for wolves in Ireland, but for all major prey species across the globe. Once you lose them, and people lose the familiarity with them, they become what I would describe as the big fear. With a capital FEAR. So you kind of, you think of the Maasai warriors in Africa, no problem dealing with lions in their area. We would be absolutely terrified if there was even one loose lion in the whole country. And the same with wolves as well. I think it's familiarity. And I think it's one of the reasons why when the reintroduction of the eagles, and particularly the golden eagle, they brought over Scottish farmers to Ireland who had golden eagles to explain to them, look, that this isn't a challenge, and to kind of lose the big fear. Obviously, bird species which are no threat to humans are much more straightforward, even though we've had challenging reintroductions with poisonings and all that. Now we're talking about a land-based pack animal. So it's a very different scenario in that sense. And there are no major predators on the Irish landscape apart from the two-legged variety. Okay, there are, we don't have, a fox. Nobody's going to be afraid of a fox. So for me, actually, I kind of fondly have thought about this over the last year or two. I think we should start with the lynx. Because the lynx is, number one, it's a solo animal. It's a solo predator. It's not as big. It wouldn't be seen, I think, as much as a challenge of trying to reintroduce the wolf. I think lynx are being reintroduced into Scotland, though I have no confirmation of that. I think that would be a step in the right direction. And that would help, in a sense, alleviate the fear down the line. So I think that's the process. So I think that would be the scientific process of doing it in a staged, controlled, scientific manner. I have given many talks on wolves to local community organisations and local societies, and it has been suggested to me by a number of people, well, that's going to take forever, cost a lot of money, and might not work. Why not we just get a couple of packs of wolves and release them in, say, Killarney National Park and see what happens? It's a high-risk strategy. I don't know how popular it would be in Killarney or Glenveigh or Wicklow Mountains or wherever it is. It's a high-risk strategy, but it's certainly a strategy, and it's certainly one I hadn't thought about until it was brought up by a person saying, well, let's go for it. Let's see what happens. My own view of that is it would be too high risk. I have given, I don't know how many dozen wolf talks around the country, and invariably there is a huge crowd turns up. So there is a huge interest. I remember I gave one just before the pandemic. I gave one in I think was it Carlow or Laois, anyway, historical, archaeological, one of those sites. They had to get a bigger room. There was so much interest, than they usually had. So instead of having 40 or 50, they had 120. And they had children that came along as well, and teenagers who were interested. So I think there is a big interest. I think there is a real fascination with the story. And when you start to tell the evidence and the stories and the town and names and the mythology, people are even more engrossed and surprised and somewhat shocked as well. I have had, in earlier days before the book came out, people who literally would not believe there were wolves in Ireland, which I found astounding. But nevertheless, that's the case. And academically, the book has done really well and is still doing well. And I see it quoted in lots of things and my other wolf publications, which led up to the book. So there's a strong interest in wolves, not just in Ireland, but across Britain and across Europe as well. And I think it's only a question of time before I think Scotland will reintroduce them. Okay, I couldn't give you a date or a year or a decade, but I think certainly, the lynx is the first route. Re-establish that familiarity with larger predators, show that this is not a threat, and then move to the next level. Arguably we could go bears as well down the line. Arguably, I know, again, having, like you said, in Estonia, I couldn't believe the number of bears that they were talking about when I was there. As a relatively small country, much smaller than Ireland, but then it was 50% forest cover, and that makes all the difference. And I've had some absurd arguments over the years with people, but I said, well, why not the European lion? Let's go back 2,000 years. So, you could keep going back as far as you want. Reindeer, for example, easy reintroduction. It's a strange one, really. I spend most of my time, I'm a climatologist by training. a historical climatologist, so I'm very familiar with the historical records. So my goal really is to reconstruct past climate and weather disasters using a variety of documentary data, early instrumental data, and later instrumental data, and I really work our way back from the modern day data, which is fairly limited in terms of timescale, and try and do a better, more nuanced understanding of what's happened in the past. And I'm very interested in the climate history of Ireland, the Little Ice Age, what was it like in the Little Ice Age, what was it like in the medieval warm period, what was it like when the Romans were marauding across all of Western Europe and North Africa and the Middle East, and yet they never made it to Ireland. What was the climate? Can we tell anything about the climate? And we're very fortunate. We have lots of records. We've got the Irish Annals, various ones which have actually recorded lots of weather and climate type information, not every year by any means, but certainly. So I was familiar with a lot of the historical data. And from my own undergraduate days, I did a course on quaternary geography and geology. So that would look at the time period of the last 1.6 to 1.8 million years. And one of the things it looks at is the changes in plants and animals. So things like the giant Irish elk, which is extinct globally for probably the last 8,500 years. Those creatures fascinated me, and really fascinated me when I realised actually wolves were around in Ireland, because I didn't know that until I did that actual course. So it kind of started off by accident in many respects. As occasionally I would find a wolf reference because I kind of was tuned into wolves. So I started just putting them into a folder, never thinking very much about it at the time. And eventually, after I'd say about maybe 8 or 10 years, if I was looking at a historic book and looking for weather records, I'd always check for a wolf reference. And every now and again, I get lucky. So I started to realize that maybe there was a little bit more information out there than people had realized. Now, I was guided by 2 previous pieces of work. There was a fantastic Folan's Mammals book. I don't remember the Folan's Mammals books. They were little small books. They were kind of targeted at kind of, I suppose, secondary school children, really. And there was one on Irish mammals, and there was a little short chapter on wolves, and there was a few historical references. And that was a starting point. There was also reference to a book called by Harting back in 1880s, Extinct Animals in Britain, something along those lines. I'd say the poor man's book has never been looked at since, but there was a whole long chapter on wolves. Now, most of the references were to the UK, but there was references to Ireland because, of course, this was written in the 1880s. And it was like referencing things like aurochs, the original cattle, and all sorts of interesting material as well. So I knew there was bits and pieces done. I also knew in the Irish Naturalist Journal, those little short articles on reference to little wolves when people found reference to wolves in historic documents. So there was a little bit of a start point. But I also realized that, they were approaching it very much from a zoological perspective, and I knew there was a much wider context. And the wider context, of course, was heritage, culture, place names, a whole variety of other lines of evidence. And other people then suggested lines of evidence to me I hadn't even thought of either. References to wolves in the Ogham inscriptions. Even though many of them are probably not actually wolves, but they might refer to a prince like a wolf means he was a ferocious fighter or ferocious prince, etc. But nevertheless, there was lines of evidence that kept coming up, little avenues I could follow, and I just kept at it, not as a full time, but as an every now and again break from number crunching and that. And every time I would look at new historical archives or data set, I'd always look at the index for wolves or have a flick through if I saw there was maybe there was a somewhat relevant chapter that might have a chance. And you'd have days when you'd get weeks and months when you get nothing new, and then you might have a glorious day when you might hit on a couple of paragraphs or even a little short journal article or something that would give you some new information. And I'll give you a recent example, and just to show you. Actually, it was the publishers of the book said to me that in a rare manuscript sale recently, there was a reference to a handwritten document on wolves in Ireland and their economic impact. So I phoned up the seller. I won't name who it is, and there was about a page and a half of information on it, including some references to wolves I had not seen before, so new information. Now, this document, I think it was 8 or 10 handwritten pages, undated, but probably late 1600s, unsigned, so we don't know who the author is. So I was thinking, I'm going to buy this because this is going to be a fantastic bit of information, until I heard the price and nearly fell off the stool. So do you want to know what the price was quoted?
Yeah, tell us.
It was €25,000.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. That's a lot, man.
€25,000. Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt there's information in that would be unique, would be completely new, would be in a fantastic edition. Because I will do a second edition of the Wolf book before I retire in 5 or 6 years' time. So I will actually update because I've got a lot of information since, and I'm still following avenues of research and things. So, for example, good one is be the hagiography, looking at the lives of Irish saints, and more of these have been published. I'm finding more and more references to wolves. They're all male saints for a long time, and then I found a St. Bridget reference.
Wow.
Now, they're probably all mythological stories in the sense that these are all about showing the power of the church and the power of the saints, but nevertheless, they're an Irish context and they're a part of the story of Irish wolves, and they're depicted in manuscripts as well and interlinked with the whole werewolf idea as well as the Irish as werewolves as well. So, yeah, so there's still lots to be done. And one of the things I'm hoping to get done is we do have a folklore department in the university, and my Irish wouldn't be good enough, but I know there's a vast amount of untranslated Irish archives and folklore that probably will contain additional wolf references that I've never come across. But I need somebody who's a specialist in the Irish language to do that kind of work and who would have folklore interest. So I certainly don't think I've exhausted all supplies of information. And I think even after the second edition, no doubt I'll put it out and somebody will phone me up the following day or 3 weeks after and say, well, you never mentioned this. And I'll be going, oh no, third edition. So interestingly with wolves, I mean, if you look even at the modern day distribution of wolves, they go from the subarctic and the Arctic right down into the equator. So they are phenomenally adaptable. Now, what happens with them is they tend to get subspecies. So they tend to have, so for example, if you look at the wolves in India, they look very thin. They have a much lighter coat, as you'd expect. If you look at the ones in places like Alaska or Siberia, they're much broader and they have much heavier and denser coats. And that's just the adaptation to the climate. So in terms of the climate change in Ireland over the last 2,000 years, there's modern day comparables to every single sequence we had. So the Roman period up to maybe about 500 or 600 AD, relatively good climate, allowing for the expansion of the empire, creating food surpluses so they could devote labor to things like building roads, building infrastructure, waging war. Okay, and then if you go to the Dark Ages, when the climates deteriorate up to about 800 AD, then conditions are much more difficult. You see the collapse of the Roman Empire, but still these would be conditions that wolves they would be more than happy to adjust to. And the medieval warm period, the same, and also obviously the Little Ice Age. They'd all present challenges, but certainly nothing that the wolves can't overcome.